But fortunately, we were scheduled to talk to Father John Finley about Vespers, and I know what he wanted to talk about because we talk about this all the time. And so I'm going to share his stories so that they're valuable. And there's about 16 minutes of wasted footage, but this is just part of what we'll do. And as soon as we get it figured out, I'll have him come on and tell it in his own words. But for those who are watching that are interested, basically, we see Vespers in several different ways. The first thing that is valuable that we wanted to talk about is that we know Vespers, at least in the Antiochian Archdiocese. Beyond that, I can't really speak to other jurisdictions because every jurisdiction is going to be different. But we know in the Antiochian Archdiocese, one of the things we watch for is whether or not the church is getting 20% attendance at Saturday night Great Vespers from what they get on Sunday morning. And so let's say your average Sunday morning is 100 people, then hopefully if everything's okay, you're getting about 20 people at Vespers the night before. Obviously we'd love 100, but the average church, we're looking for about 20. And when it's falling below 20%, we go and dig a little deeper and to see if that can tell us that something might be wrong or something probably is wrong. It's not a guarantee. It's just something that helps us keep a pulse on the health of the parish. And so that's something we work with. We have about 40 missions that turn in monthly reports. And that's one of the things we look for when we're reading reports. We read all the reports. At least two of us read all the reports. And so we're going to have double eyes on there, my eyes and then someone else's eyes. And then but that helps us kind of get an idea. And it's usually accurate. We'll check in on someone that has really low Vespers attendance and we find out, something's happening or something's unhealthy. We really try to look at healthy versus unhealthy. And so that's one of the best ways that you can find that out is by checking Vespers. There's a lot of different ways to talk about the core of a parish. There's different cores. But one of the easiest things to understand is that the people showing at Vespers are probably your spiritual core. We could whittle it down to that. And so that's why if you don't, and the average, that's why you want to make sure you have 20%, because the average church has a 20% core. But if your core is not showing up to Vespers, then we have something we need to look at. So there's a whole lot of reasons why we want to make sure we're getting at least 20%. You'll find that in a lot of the missions or the smaller churches, it's interesting that where they might average something a little bit higher, and then some of the largest churches, they might average something a little bit lower. But we're trying to set that as the minimum. We want to see at least 20% there. The other thing that we know works with Vespers that we've seen multiple times, and almost all of our churches that started from scratch have started this way, and that is that they had weekly readers Vespers. And this is for several reasons. So if you've ever had a desire to start something in your area, or you've worked with a priest who wanted to start something, or you are a priest who wanted to start something, this is our typical protocol, is that we like to see readers Vespers set up. And there's multiple reasons for that. And so hopefully I'm going to remember all of those. The first thing that we know is that it's going to tell us how invested these people are when they're showing up and reading Vespers. And if you think about Vespers, most of Vespers does not involve the priest. Obviously, a daily Vespers or a Great Vespers does, but most of it is reading through those hymns and hearing the Psalms, and so we can still be ministered to by all of that. And for someone that lives far, a lot of these missions, they're starting a mission because the closest church is an hour away, and Vespers is an integral part of the life of the church, and it can be really hard. For me, almost impossible to feel prepared on Sunday morning if I missed Vespers. And so one of the things we advocate is if you can try to have Vespers on Saturday night, you might not be able to. You might have to do a reader's Vespers some other night. You can have it in somebody's home, and we can you can get trained. We have resources on chanting it. You can start off by just reading it while you're learning how to chant. You can intone it while you graduate and you kind of move up. That's kind of the next level. And then eventually you learn how to actually chant. And we actually have resources. We've linked to a podcast that's at Ancient Faith Radio. If you want the direct link, go to our website, missionsandevangelism.com, that teaches you Byzantine chant. I don't have a link for Slavic chant, So I apologize if that's what you would be looking for. But if you're wanting to learn Byzantine chant, go to missionsandevangelism.com, click on the praising side, and you'll see several resources for learning how to chant. It's very helpful. I will say about that podcast that it took me from knowing nothing to being okay. And that's about the best that we can expect when you're not musically inclined. I'm not a singer. I'm not, musically gifted. And so that podcast was still able to get me to a point to be okay and semi-comfortable with the 8 tones. Some of them I'm more comfortable with than the others. And so as they're doing Reader's Vespers, and it's the chanting that really makes Vespers. And so you can really have a robust Reader's chanters if you have some good chanting that's happening. You can combine that with some other edification. You might want to tag along with that. If you're using Reader's Vespers to start a group, you probably want to add on maybe a Bible study or have a meal together or some kind of edification beyond just the service if you're trying to grow a group. But you're making that Vesper service that the core feature of what you're doing. We have resources that we can make available for those who are interested in how to put that service together. Not everybody knows how to do that, and it can be a little bit complicated. And we can streamline that process and make it a little easier if you want to start having Reader's Vespers in your area. The biggest thing I would say is basically distance. If it's hard for you to get to your church twice a week because of distance, you should consider doing Reader's Vespers. And I know of some people that have gotten a blessing to do it long term. They're not really looking to start a mission. They're not in a place to be able to do that or grow a group, but they know that it's really almost impossible to have to make it to Vespers and on Saturday night and then turn around and come back on Sunday morning if they're an hour away or an hour and a half away. And so they may not have a long-term plan other than I'm going to keep driving and I'm going to keep having Reader's Vespers. You can do it as a family, and it can be quite a blessing. Just make sure everything you're doing under the advisement of your priest. Make sure your priest is fully aware and involved of what you're doing. You don't. One of the things we don't advocate is we're not telling you to go off and start your own and you're going to work with us and leave your local priest out of it. We try to do everything through your local priest. So we want to make sure he's aware of what you're doing. And you'll be surprised at how valuable your priest can be in helping you with some of these areas. Most of our clergy have had training in chanting, especially the ones that went to seminary. And so if you're trying to get better at the surface or you're trying to understand something, your priest is probably going to be a little bit better at explaining that and meeting with you and going through that. We can help, but it's often better to have someone in person. And so to review those 2 things that we talked about in terms of Vespers, first one is that checking for 20% attendance at Great Vespers the night before. And that kind of gives you an idea of how healthy or unhealthy your parish is. That number can go up or down a little bit. But if you're averaging 10%, you might want to be honest that things are not exactly where you want them to be. And that maybe some changes need to be made. And maybe your spiritual core is not as big as it should be for the size of your parish. And so you really want to look towards having at least 20%. We did some Vespers research last year, and I'm going to share some of the information that we got from different parishes. We had one mission that averages 80% attendance at Vespers, which, glory to God. I mean, that's amazing. And I hope it continues. Other things that can happen that I know of is that Father Noah Bishelli in Sauderton, Pennsylvania, he does his catechism classes and inquirers classes right before Saturday Vespers. And he said, if you have it after Vespers, people show up for the class and miss Vespers. Even new people who are considering becoming a convert. But when he moved it to an hour before Vespers, they stayed for Vespers. And then Vespers became part of their catechism. We also know that Father Josiah Trenum does the same thing in Riverside, California, that he makes Vespers part of the catechism and that they come before Vespers, and that it's really non-negotiable. They need to understand how that begins the liturgical office and how that is going to prepare them for the Eucharist the next day. And sometimes, we're covering so many different things in catechism. Sometimes that kind of slips by if there's some greater issues the person is struggling with. And so we want to make sure that we're helping all of our clergy communicate that. And so that's part of why we did this episode today, is because there's so many different things that are related to Vespers. The last thing that I'll say about Vespers, and this also relates to Father Josiah Trenum, is this Vespers was where Father Josiah was basically converted, and we'll say in his heart. It was the Psalms being chanted, and he admitted he was not ready for the Divine Liturgy. I had a lengthy conversation with him about this. We have it on video that we're saving for a future project, where he admitted if he had gone to the Divine Liturgy as his first service, he's not sure he would have gone back. But because Vespers was his first service, it made a big difference. And we talked about how at Vespers there's equal participation. Everybody is participating equally. If they, depending on the service, some priests have you come down at the end to receive a blessing, some don't. That's okay. But Divine Liturgy can be quite intimidating for someone who's not used to liturgical services. Whereas Vespers is definitely calmer. We know that. There's a lot less going on. There is a lot less people typically, and so they might feel less overwhelmed with that. A lot of people get nervous when it's time for communion and they don't know what to do if they don't have someone there. And so if you're inviting someone to your church, Vespers is that first best service, and probably need to come to it several times, I would even say. Now, I'm speaking in generality, so we've all heard stories about someone who went to a service and it was beautiful and they were enraptured, and I'm not talking about those people. What I'm talking about is the majority of people, we don't realize, and these numbers are high, how many people come to the Divine Liturgy as their first time and they don't come back. And it's a lot. There's a lot of people that do this. And I can't help but wonder if maybe Vespers had been their first service, it would have been a little different. There's also a little bit more time to talk to them. I know a lot of our clergy make themselves available, and I'm not advocating this, just, there's some that can do this. They make themselves available for dinner, or there's, after Vespers, and say they know it's a little easier to go out to dinner with someone, whereas Sunday they're exhausted. I'm not saying all of our clergy should do that, so don't take me wrong. But if you are someone who likes to do that, that might be a great opportunity. And so Vespers is usually the best place for that first interaction. If you think about coming in as a visitor, you've never been there before, just taking in the iconography, taking in that there's a man up there in a black robe that you don't know what he's doing, the chanters, the standing up, the sitting down, the crossing yourself. You could basically be on information overload. You have all this stuff going on. But, you add to that a full room, loud choir, lots of movement back and forth, and it just can be quickly intimidating. And what we find beautiful, there are converts now who admitted their first time they were repulsed. It was too much for them, and they were able to work through it. But we only get one chance at a first impression, and so we want to make that first impression on a usual basis, Vespers, and have a little bit of time before that and a little bit of time after that. And be prepared when they're going to come to Vespers. They're probably going to show up early because they're nervous about walking in the middle of something. And so if they're coming, hopefully they're coming, and that you can be there ready for them and be there about 15 minutes early. Feel free to give them like a 5-minute tour, show them so that they're prepared and can engage in Vespers. Pull out a service book and show them parts of the service that they're going to recognize. We need to remember that most of our visitors are Christians. They're going to be familiar with a lot of these hymns. Show them the opening psalm and what it looks like and the different hymns, and say, this is stuff that you probably would recognize, if you ever read through the Psalms. That can, you're finding something that you have in common with the person that's a visitor, and then now they can feel a little bit more grounded and a little less alienated because there's something familiar for them. One of my favorite things to do when they come to Vespers is introduce one icon, just one of them, and make it one of the saints that you have learned a story about. Try to learn the stories of all the saints in your church, but just one that they're going to be able to look at. And if you ever travel around and visit other Orthodox churches, you might find yourself looking at the iconography. And I discovered I do this, and I know a lot of people do this that travel a lot. We look for the saints we recognize. And it's kind of like looking for familiar faces. If you walk into a room of people, you look for the people that you know. so that you feel a little bit more comfortable. And we do the same thing naturally at churches. And so if you can introduce your visitor to Vespers to one of the saints, just one of them, and that story, they may not be able to like keep their attention span for the entire Vespers like the rest of us do. And so if they happen to turn their attention span to that saint and think about that saint, they're beginning a relationship with that saint without even realizing it. And that saint is now knowing that they need to pray to God for this person, and that they're going to have an impact on this person's first visit. And so it's like we're recruiting the help. We're always trying to recruit the help of the saints, of those in heaven. And so this is a great way to begin that introduction and so that the visitor can begin to see the icons as, who these people really are, and not just something weird. Most of our Protestants have had this upbringing that, icons are dangerous. And, I think if we treated icons the way they think we do, that would be right. And so we need to orient them with what we're really doing and teaching them the difference between respect and worship, and between there's veneration. And most of America is not used to veneration. And so we get to introduce this new category of veneration, what that looks like. And if they tend to go there in their mind or in their heart a little bit during Vespers, I think that's a good thing, because they're likely to develop a little bit of relationship. And that's basically all I would have to say about Vespers. Father John Finley would have probably been a bit more eloquent in his comments. But I would say that that's what we need to remember. If you're a church leader, make sure that you're having at least 20% of your Sunday attendance at Vespers. Consider having more readers Vespers in outlying areas that are away from the churches. If you're far away and you can't make Vespers, talk with your priest about having Vespers in your home, or having a small group to get together. And then also using Vespers as the first service for a visitor instead of the Divine Liturgy. And I talked about my conversation with Father Josiah Trinum on that. And he's quite sure, we don't know this, but he's pretty sure that if his first experience had been the Divine Liturgy, he wouldn't have gone back. I do remember also, this is on record so I can talk about it, Deacon Michael Hyatt, in his podcast, at the intersection of East and West, admitted that his first time to a Divine Liturgy, he was repulsed a little bit, but he was also drawn to it. It was mixed. And I don't know how much different that would have been if he had been allowed to come 15 minutes early to Vespers, had a chance to talk with someone, get a tiny tour, meet one of the saints, and then have a calm 45 minutes of the Psalms being chanted in front of you. And the Psalms are so engaging, great, especially Great Vespers. I hope it's okay to say this, but Great Vespers is my favorite service, because it's one of the only services that always grounds me, no matter what's happening. I always feel grounded when I come out of Great Vespers. And I don't like it because it's shorter than Divine Liturgy. Like daily Vespers is even shorter, but I love the combination of the hymns plus the music of Great Vespers. It's just about the right amount of time to bring me back to reality, rejuvenated, and feeling ready for what God has in store for me, especially the next morning. So that's the list. And then I also said, if you wanted help putting together Readers Vespers in your area, make sure your priest knows that you're wanting to do this and you have your priest's blessing. If he can't help you, we can help you do that. You just have to contact us through our Antiochian page that you're watching here. You can also message us through our website, www.missionsandevangelism.com. That's where the chanting resource is that I talked about under the praising section. And that's everything. So I'm curious if we have any questions. I'm going to look through here and see if we have any questions. How many come to Vespers first and return, per Kenny Scott? I don't know that, but I do know that I have been able to collect the data on how many people come to Divine Liturgy, and it's difficult, it's complicated, it's confusing, it's intimidating. And so we have tons of those stories. We hardly have any stories of people complaining about their first visit to Vespers. And so that's how I'm kind of using this anecdotally, is that when I listen to complaints, all of the complaints are from when the first visit is Divine Liturgy, and they weren't ready for that. I guess you could prepare them for that, but like I said, all the people that we're talking to, for example, I can give you a list of people that I've talked to that in length. I recorded an episode with Father Joel Gillum. Father Joel Gillum is Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, and he's always used Vespers as the place to invite people. He even does an open house periodically on a Saturday night so that you can intentionally bring guests, and he's ready for a Q&A and a short presentation on the church. So it's just something collectively known among the clergy, and pretty much every priest I've talked to, they're either using it officially or unofficially, or formally or informally. But we're trying to make this a bit more of a formal and official understanding, so that all of our congregations understand that that's the best place to bring someone. And if you're not currently attending Vespers and you want to bring a friend, that helps you consider, maybe I need to rethink how often I'm attending Vespers, because I really want to share the faith with someone. We're not trying to use Vespers evangelistically, which means I'm not trying to let Vespers do the evangelism. Hopefully you're already having conversations and they're intrigued and they're interested. And so that's not what we're advocating. What we're basically talking about is, now that they're interested in the faith and that you've articulated some basic tenets of it, and they're interested in who you are as a Christian and why you act the way you do and your belief system, and they're interested in visiting, then Vespers becomes a nice place for that to begin. Let's look at some of the other questions that we have. Let's see here. We have Father John Finley saying that every week he produces Vespers, Orthros, and Typica for each weekend. And so if you're interested in getting a part of that, we can help you connect with that. It's a service he provides for our missions, and it's quite useful. And then we do know that, yes, other jurisdictions use the Antiochian Matins and Vespers PDFs. That's so useful as well. If you don't know that, if you go to antiochian.org under the online liturgics department, every week they put up Matins and Vespers PDFs, and everything's laid out for you. It tells you exactly, literally from the first line to the last line, what tones everything is in, and so that can be quite helpful. And it looks like that's the last question. We have Art Dossie asking to be put on the list, but I don't see any other questions coming in. And so I think we're gonna say that's a wrap. And apologize for not being able to get Father John Finley on here. We're still trying to figure out the split screen. I'm not interested in you guys having to listen to me only every week. We have some really great guests lined up. And so we will figure this out eventually. I'm excited about the different topics that we're exploring. And to give you an idea, one of them that we're working on right now, we have to hone in. We have so many different topics being brought to us. One of them specifically that was requested that we will be dealing with soon is the parish councils, structure of parish councils, administration of parish councils. And I'm pretty excited about how we're going to be dealing with that. Later on in February, we're going to be on with Father Josiah Trenum, and we're going to be talking about a tea, a ladies' tea that they have, and how it's open to the public, and that both Orthodox and non-Orthodox are invited to that tea. And so we have a lot of great stories lined up. There are so many stories. And I'm convinced, I've said this before, every one of our churches has a story that is working. And we hope to get all of those stories on here and share them with you. So thank you for your time on here. Let's see, we have Father Matthew Howell. I use Vespers as a training ground for altar boys before having them serve at liturgy. That's a great idea. And I forgot, there's probably dozens of different things related to Vespers. We just highlighted some of the bigger ones, but there's a lot of things that happen with Vespers. And so, yeah, that's true, because you have the little entrance at Great Vespers. This is a great time for your little ones to get started, not feel as intimidated, get used to what the little entrance is, and then you can explain, okay, now we're going to do that same thing in Divine Liturgy, and then the difference between that in the Great Entrance. And so that's a great point. And I don't think I see any other questions. And so I'm going to sign off, and we'll see you next Thursday at 1 p.m. And eventually we'll get this figured out. Thanks, and God bless.